This video is sponsored by Flexispot. What happens when a Genestealer cult steals a Space Marine Dreadnought? They put a Tyranid inside of it, and because it's a very sophisticated life support system, it grew into something truly horrifying, so let's build that. I got started with a Dreadnought, and my models are assembled, so that's going to be a little bit of a double-edged sword. I began testing out all the variations that I had that would match the size of a Dreadnought, but every pair I tried reminded me of chicken wings, and I was not in the mood to make a massive chicken. In fact, I was in the mood for some sushi. So when I landed on the Crushing Claws, I knew I found my perfect match. Better than that, I finally had the idea for my Tyranid, the Hermit Crab, using this Dreadnought as a literal shell. When most people look at this model, the thing they notice right away is probably the really cool looking body. However, the part I want to gather is actually the head. Similar to the Dreadnought, because the model is assembled, I did have to try extremely hard to get it off there. But with a few strategically placed snips, I was able to crack this thing open like a literal crab. But still trying my best to make sure I don't damage any part of the head, as I don't currently know how much of it I'm actually gonna need. And just like that, the two pieces were separated and this very beautiful model was unfortunately destroyed. Then using my dull X-Acto knife, I made sure to clean off some of the extra pieces of plastic that were a little bit too sharp. Now, I just need to attach it to the actual Dreadnought. I removed the frontal plate of the Dreadnought and started to tear away their sarcophagus, with the voice at the back of my head calling me a lunatic and the fact that I'm destroying easily one of the coolest models. Then I had to repeat the exact same step in the frontal plate. Yet right away, it became quite apparent that I was gonna have to cut away a lot more than I thought. At this point, the plate is quite thin, so I didn't want to make any additional cuts as it'll ruin the integrity. As much as I really wanted to avoid that and save as much of this model as possible, I had to start cutting into the neck. This part did get me a little bit worried as I did not want to cut any more into the Tyranid, but there just wasn't much room for the Dreadnought. Yet every single time I would measure the head against the opening, it felt like I was almost there and I was just a few scrapes off. Yet with every single scrape, it seemed to make no difference whatsoever. And just like the dwarfs from Lord of the Rings, I dug a little bit too deep. And the frontal panel snapped, which left it with a very unfortunate wobble that I was gonna have to fix later on. With everything now being in a perfect fit, I got out the green stuff. I pre-mixed all of my green stuff right away, but that's a mistake that's gonna come back to haunt me. At the moment, the biggest priority I had was trying to make sure that I can secure this head to the Dreadnought itself. Because I had removed so much of it, there just wasn't really much for it to hold on to. To increase the structural integrity, I tried to spread out the green stuff as far as I could in this massive O-ring. Hopefully this way, once it cures, it can actually be stable enough for me to paint the model. Yet sadly, there was just simply too much wobble in the frontal plate, so I had to add some additional green stuff from the back. I think this can also be an interesting visual that the Tyranid is getting far too big for the Dreadnought. I thought it would be a lot more interesting if this Dreadnought had a very large amount of damaged panels. This is a wild Tyranid barely being controlled by the Genestealers. This rage-fueled Tyranid monstrosity is bumping into everything and scraping against the walls, with most bolter rounds simply bouncing off the heavy Dreadnought armor and the heaviest artillery barely making a dent, not deep enough to hurt the Tyranid itself. Then I moved on to the exciting part of attaching the claws. Genestealers famously worship the four-armed god, so I thought it'd be quite appropriate to give this Tyranid some extra arms. Additionally, repurposing the extra bits I had left over from the Neurophage. But first, I want to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Flexispot, that create these really awesome standing desks. For example, this is the E7 Pro that comes with this very nice bamboo surface, and Flexispot have a variety of desks that are quite affordable, and you can essentially customize it to your needs. I wanted a very long desk, but I didn't want to go for the largest one because it literally would not fit in my room, so I went for one of their largest options, and it is so nice to have so much space to just be able to do whatever. Space is a little bit of an issue, especially when you have so many paints on the table, you have so many parts scattered around, so having something that is very large and very stable, it's nice. Not to mention their cable management system, so it's easy to stay organized. Flexispot desks are very stable during the lifting process. On top of that, they can lift over 300 pounds, so this is quite easy for the desk, but I'm sort of trying to figure out right now how I'm gonna get down because they're also having a fall sale, so make sure you click the link below and check out Flexispot. Part of the Genestealer dogma has them worship the four-armed emperor, so to the Genestealers around him, this will be the living avatar of him. blessing them with his presence and bestowing a massive amount of courage and rallying cries around it. And when this thing gets a little bit too hungry and snacks on one of the Genestealers around it, well, sacrifices to the Emperor are a natural thing. When I was finishing up the arms, I sort of had an additional silly idea that I thought could really work on this Tyranid, but at the same time just be a little bit goofy. So I reached back into the Neurophage and started to remove the back portion of the Tyranid, which was actually so round that I couldn't really find a place to really grip onto it. But after a little bit of elbow grease and a little bit of struggle, I finally got the piece I really wanted. I wasn't really quite sure how exactly I was going to attach it to the model, as I was definitely not going to make any additional cuts to the Dreadnought. So I sculpted quite a generous O-ring to attach it, giving this Tyranid a massive shrimp tail that is now hanging from the backside of the Dreadnought. Now I just need to do a little bit of sculpting to make it look a bit better. While I was attaching it, I sort of noticed that I was having a lot of issues trying to sculpt my green stuff. I worked on this model long enough that my green stuff began to seriously cure. The sculpting tools were no longer able to really do anything, so I had to figure out a different solution to how to provide some texture for this Tyranid. So I grabbed each of the limbs and began just twisting them around, generating these very interesting grooves that looked very organic, especially compared to the original smooth surface they had. I also mixed in just a little bit more of the fresh green stuff just to provide some more textures for it. Then for the final cherry on top, I literally had an idea to place a banner Genestealer on top of the Dreadnought. I'll be replicating the exact same color scheme I did for the Space Marine Genestealers and also giving the other one an upgrade. I started off with the most simple and logical thing, which is to prime the entire model in a gray color. While I do prefer building up color on the black surface usually, with a white or a gray and yellow it doesn't really work, so I usually prime my model in that color just to give myself an easier time with it. Then airbrushing the final gray highlight for the armor itself. I was gonna go just for the highlights themselves, but I thought it would be much easier to just essentially give the model a zenithal highlight with it. With so many intricate details, working on this Dreadnought is going to be incredibly difficult, but I got started on the only part I could think of right away, which is to start painting the purple carapace. During this process, I already got a glimpse in the frustrations that are ahead of me. With the purple carapace finished, I took out the rest of the colors. I began by using some of the rubber black to fill in all of the bullet holes. I did my best to be quite meticulous with this step and take as much time as I needed. However, unlike with the black surface, when you paint on white, every single mistake is visible right away. When I did finally get to coloring in all of the joint areas with the exact same rubber black, it felt like an impossible task. I sat there looking at the model trying to think of the best approach until I finally just gave up and started painting. With every single stroke of a paintbrush, I began to feel like the task at hand was actually achievable. So I did my best to ignore all those tiny little mistakes and just focus on painting the rubber black areas, and include the big carapace areas on the list of the rubber parts. Then I moved on to painting the tentacles, which I expected to be quite a straightforward process, however I made quite a grievous mistake. Instead of going with Bugman Glow like I originally intended, I thought I could mix it myself. However, every single time I would try to repaint the tentacles, the color would just be off in a very unpleasant way. I tried numerous different recipes, but for some reason I just could not find the right one. In total, I must have repainted about 4 to 5 times. Finally, I got to a decent color and just decided to leave them alone and focus on painting the purple carapace. Fortunately for this step, I knew precisely what I wanted. I took my purple and added just a slight amount of blue as well as white to make the color a little bit colder. Then when it came for the final highlight, I instead took a little bit of ice yellow to warm it up as if the sun is hitting it. With the beautiful contrast of colors that created, I decided to repeat the exact same idea when it came to painting the rubber carapace. The process of painting the carapace was quite methodical, but additionally, it gave me the confidence to finally see that the model was getting closer to being complete. I moved on to the part that I knew would just instantly make the model look a lot more alive and energetic. So I airbrushed the claws in this very green-blue highlight that I used on my previous Genestealer Space Marines, and using pure ice yellow on its own to provide some textural highlights for the claws. All of my Space Marine Genestealers have this little mark on their left knee. I never thought of a good reason for why they paint this on their knee, but I do think it looks neat and provides an extra little detail for the model. If you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear them. Then I got to my favorite part, which to most people would probably seem like the most frustrating and nerve-wracking part, which is to sponge the damage on the model. However, this was incredibly relaxing and I just enjoyed the process quite a bit. And a nice tip is that if you ever want to create these very cool streaking effects, you can just simply grab a sponge with a little bit of paint and drag it downwards. To reinforce the chipping damage on the armor even further, I began to do a reverse edge highlighting using this very dark brown color. Painting some additional chipping damage was the most requested comment I got in the previous video, and I just really thought it was an incredibly good idea, giving this Dreadnought a feeling that he survived a massive amount of battles and he's still alive and kicking. Even though all of these bullet holes are 3-dimensional, they looked incredibly flat, so to fix that up, I decided to do some additional edge highlighting just to make the holes pop a little bit extra. And when everything was done, I knew that I had to give this model an additional awesome base. So I designed and printed something special for it. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed that, consider giving the video a like, but for now, let's see the final result.